Thomas Walker stood by the window of his small cottage. Rain fell softly outside. The tiny drops matched how he felt inside, quiet and sad. 6 months had gone by since the factory closed. 3 months since Martha left him after 20 years of marriage. "You've changed," Martha had told him before she left. Her eyes showed both sadness and anger. "You don't talk anymore, you don't smile, I can't reach you." Thomas knew she was right. When the factory shut down, something in him shut down too. At 52 years old, he felt too old to start fresh, too tired to keep trying. On his kitchen table sat a pile of letters from jobs that didn't want him. Each one made his hopes smaller. Only Henry stayed with him now. Henry was an old border collie dog. Once he had run through fields with great joy. Now he mostly slept by the fire. Thomas reached down to pet Henry's grey head. "Just you and me now, old boy," he said softly. The whole village of Millfield had changed since the factory closed. Everyone felt the loss. Shops on the high street were empty, with dusty windows. The King's Arms pub used to be full of happy voices and good stories. Now it was quiet most nights. Thomas didn't like to go out much these days, but this evening he made himself take Henry for a walk. The cool air felt nice on his face as he walked toward the village green. He saw a small group of people standing around a notice board. Thomas got closer to see what they were looking at. A bright poster caught his eye. "Millfield Revival Project, community meeting tomorrow, all welcome." Thomas almost walked away. He thought, what good would a meeting do? But Henry pulled on his leash, moving toward the group. An older woman named Edith turned and smiled when she saw him. "Thomas, we haven't seen you in ages," she said warmly. "You'll come tomorrow, won't you? We need everyone if we're going to save our village." For the first time in months, Thomas felt a tiny bit of hope grow inside him. Maybe it was just Edith's kind smile or the friendly nod from Bill, who used to be the postmaster. Whatever it was, Thomas heard himself say, "I'll think about it." That night, lying in bed and listening to the rain, Thomas wondered if maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought he was. The next morning, Thomas woke up early. He hadn't slept well. All night he had thought about the meeting. Should he go? Would it matter if he did? People might stare at him, they might pity him. The thought made his stomach tight. Henry watched him move around the cottage. The old dog seemed to know something was different today. He followed Thomas from room to room, wagging his tail slowly. "What do you think, Henry?" Thomas asked. "Should we give it a try?" Henry barked once, as if saying yes. After breakfast, Thomas did something he hadn't done in weeks. He shaved carefully. He put on his good trousers and a clean shirt. He even polished his shoes a bit. Looking in the mirror, he hardly knew himself. The man looking back seemed older, with deeper lines around his eyes, but he was still Thomas Walker. The community hall was just a short walk from his cottage. As Thomas got closer, he could see people going inside. Some he knew well, others just by sight. His steps slowed. The urge to turn back grew strong. "Thomas!" called a voice behind him. It was Mary Cooper from the village bakery. She carried a large tray covered with a cloth. "I'm glad you're coming," she said. "I made scones for after the meeting." Thomas nodded and fell into step beside her. It was easier to walk in with someone than to go in alone. The hall was almost full. Chairs had been set in rows facing a small stage. Thomas sat near the back, where he hoped no one would notice him. But people did. Several nodded to him. Bill came over to shake his hand. Even young Jack Lloyd, whose father had worked with Thomas at the factory, stopped to say hello. At 2 o'clock, Richard Bennett walked onto the stage. He had been the headmaster at the village school before he retired. Everyone respected Richard. "Friends," Richard began, "our village is in trouble. We all know it. The factory closing was a hard blow. Young people are leaving, shops are closing. But Millfield has faced hard times before. Our village has stood for hundreds of years. It can stand for hundreds more, but only if we work together." Richard then told them about his plan. The empty factory could become workshops for people who made things by hand. The fields could grow food to sell at markets. Tourists would come to see the crafts and buy the food. "We have the skills," Richard said. "We have the heart. Do we have the will?" The room was quiet for a moment. Then a man in the front row raised his hand and said he could teach woodworking. A woman offered to make candles. Another man said he would help fix the factory roof. Thomas sat very still. Something was happening in the room. Something was happening inside him too. For the first time since the factory closed, he felt needed again. Slowly, Thomas raised his hand. "Yes, Thomas," Richard said. "I was maintenance supervisor." "For 15 years, Thomas said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. "I know that building better than anyone. I can help." The room grew quiet. Then people began to clap. Mary Cooper, sitting nearby, reached over and squeezed his arm. "Welcome back, Thomas," she said. "We've missed you." Thomas stood at the doorway of the community hall. He didn't think so many people would be there. His hands felt wet with sweat. His heart beat fast. After staying alone for so many months, being around lots of people made him nervous. "There's a seat here," called a kind voice. It was Mary Cooper, who owned the village bakery. Her warm smile helped Thomas feel brave enough to walk across the room. He sat down in the empty chair next to her. "Wasn't sure you'd come," Mary said. She held out a plate with biscuits. "Homemade this morning." Thomas took one and nodded his thanks. He had forgotten how nice it felt when someone was kind to him. Richard Bennett stood at the front of the room. He used to be the headmaster of the village school before he retired. Richard spoke clearly about their problem. Millfield Village was slowly dying. The factory closing was just the start of their troubles. Young people were moving away. Shops were shutting down. The friendly spirit that made their village special was fading. "But," Richard said with fire in his eyes, "we have two choices. We can watch our home die, or we can fight to bring it back to life." Richard then told them his big plan. He wanted to change Millfield into a place known for crafts and local food. The empty factory could become workshops where people could make things by hand. The fields no one used anymore could grow fresh vegetables. Tourists would come to see and buy these things, bringing money and life back to the village. "We need everyone's skills," Richard said. "Everyone's ideas. Everyone's hands." People started to raise their hands to offer help. James Wilson said he could teach others how to work with wood. Beatrice Miller knew how to make soap from natural things. Peter Thompson said they could use his fields to grow food. When Richard asked who would help fix up the old factory building, Thomas surprised himself. Slowly he raised his hand. "I was maintenance supervisor for 15 years, he said. His voice sounded rough because he hadn't talked much lately. "I know that building better than anyone." The room got very quiet. Then everyone started clapping, loudly. Some people patted Thomas on his back. Mary gently squeezed his arm. "We've missed you, Thomas," she whispered. As the meeting went on, Thomas felt something change inside him. For many months he had felt useless, like something thrown away. But here with his neighbors and old friends he felt important again. They needed him. After the meeting, Mary asked Thomas if he would walk her home. The night was clear, with stars shining brightly above them. They walked slowly, talking about the meeting and the plans for the village. "I think it might work," Thomas said. "But that factory needs a lot of work. The roof leaks in 3 places, and the heating system hasn't run in months." Mary smiled. "You sound like your old self again. I haven't heard you talk this much in ages." Thomas hadn't noticed, but she was right. Words were coming easily to him now, ideas too. His mind was already planning what needed to be done at the factory, making lists of materials they would need. "We're meeting tomorrow morning at the factory," Mary told him. "Just a small group to look things over. Will you come?" Thomas nodded. "I'll be there." When they reached Mary's cottage, she touched his arm. "It's good to have you back with us, Thomas." For the first time in months, Thomas felt a smile form on his face. It felt strange, but good. Walking home with Henry at his side, Thomas felt lighter than he had in a long time. His dog seemed to feel the change too. Henry walked with more bounce in his step, looking up at Thomas with bright eyes. "Maybe we're not done yet, old boy," Thomas said softly. "Maybe we're just beginning." That night Thomas couldn't sleep, but not because he was sad. His mind was too busy thinking about all the work they needed to do at the factory. He got up and found an old notebook. He began to write down ideas, draw plans, make lists of what they would need. The next morning, Thomas woke up early. He made Himself a proper breakfast for the first time in weeks. He put on his work clothes, jeans and a thick shirt with his old work boots. They felt right, like coming home. At 8 o'clock, Thomas and Henry walked to the factory. The big building looked sad and empty, with its dirty windows and weeds growing all around it. But Thomas didn't see it that way anymore. Now he saw what it could become. Mary was already there with Richard and 4 others. They looked happy to see Thomas. "Where do we start?" James Wilson asked. Thomas took a deep breath. "First, we need to check the roof. No point fixing anything inside if rain can still get in." The small group nodded, looking to him for guidance. Thomas felt something warm grow inside his chest. It was the feeling of being useful again, of having a purpose. As they walked into the old factory, Thomas felt hopeful for the first time in months. The path ahead would not be easy. There was so much to do, so many problems to solve. But now he had people to solve them with. He wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The old factory stood quiet and empty. Dust covered the windows. Thomas walked across what used to be the main work floor. Memories came back to him. For 27 years, this building had been full of machine noises and people talking. Now it was silent. "We've got a big job ahead," said Robert Green as he ran a hand through his grey hair. Robert had worked as the factory electrician before it closed. Thomas looked around with careful eyes. "We need to fix the roof first. Everything else can wait. No use doing other work if rain comes in." In the weeks that followed, Thomas became the leader of the work project. Every morning he came early with his clipboard. He made lists of jobs and told people what to do. All kinds of helpers showed up, old factory workers, people from the village, and even young people looking for something to do during school breaks. Emma Davis worked closely with Thomas. She was a single mother with 2 children who had lost her office job when the factory closed. Emma drew plans for how they would divide the big space into smaller workshops. She was full of energy and good ideas. "You're really good at this," Thomas told her one day as they looked at her drawings. Emma smiled and pushed a bit of her blonde hair behind her ear. "I never thought I would use what I learned in my design class. At the factory, they only let me file papers." As time passed, the building began to change. Workers fixed the holes in the roof. They cleaned and painted the walls. They moved out old machines. What had seemed like too big a job started to look possible. Thomas changed too. The empty feeling inside him began to fill up with a sense of purpose. He stood taller. He talked more. Sometimes he even laughed, a sound that surprised him the first time he heard it come out of his mouth. One evening, Thomas stayed late to put up some shelves. The summer sun was setting, painting the sky pink and gold. He heard footsteps and turned around. Mary Cooper stood in the doorway. She held a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "I thought you might be hungry," she said. "You've been here since early morning." They sat on upside-down wooden boxes and shared the food. There was bread still warm from Mary's oven, cheese from Bill Thompson's farm, and apple tart that tasted so good Thomas closed his eyes when he ate it. "Everyone in the village is talking about what you're doing here," Mary said. "You've given people hope, Thomas." Thomas shook his head. "I'm just fixing an old building." "No," Mary said softly. "You're helping rebuild our community. And maybe yourself too." As it got dark outside, they talked honestly about losing things and feeling alone. They talked about finding strength when you think there is none left. For the first time since his wife left, Thomas felt the coldness around his heart begin to melt. The next day, more villagers came to help. Word had spread about the progress they were making. Bill Thompson brought his 2 sons. Edith came with cookies for the workers. Even the mayor stopped by to see what was happening. Thomas showed them around, explaining their plans. "This area will be for woodworking," he said, pointing to one section. "Over there will be pottery. The back room will be perfect for weaving and textiles." "And what's that space?" asked the mayor, pointing to a sunny corner. "That's for a cafe," Emma explained. "People can watch the craftsmen work while they have tea and cake." The mayor looked impressed. "You've really thought this through." By the end of the month, the building had a new roof, clean walls, and fresh windows. Light poured in, making the space look alive again. Thomas stood in the middle of the main room. hardly believing how much they had done. Robert clapped him on the shoulder. "Remember when we thought this was impossible?" Thomas nodded. Just 6 weeks ago, he'd been sitting alone in his cottage, feeling like his life was over. Now each day had meaning. Each morning he woke up with plans and purpose. One rainy afternoon, Emma brought her children to see the progress. Her son Oliver was 10, and her daughter Grace was 7. They ran around the big space, their voices echoing. "Can we help too?" Oliver asked Thomas. "I'm good at painting." "Me too," said Grace. "And I can sweep." Thomas smiled. "We need all the help we can get. Come back on Saturday and bring your friends if you like." That Saturday, 10 children showed up with their parents. Thomas gave them small jobs, sorting nails, holding tools, sweeping clean areas. The old factory filled with children's laughter for the first time. At lunchtime, everyone sat together at long tables Emma had set up. They shared food, told stories, and made plans. Thomas found himself sitting between Emma and Mary, with Emma's children across from him. "Are you going to live here too?" Grace asked him. Thomas laughed. "No, I have my cottage." "But you're here all the time anyway," the little girl said. It was true. Thomas spent more time at the factory than at home these days. His cottage felt empty and lonely compared to this place full of purpose and friendship. That evening, as summer turned to early fall, Thomas walked home with Mary again. The air was cooler now, with a hint of autumn. "The factory will be ready to open in a month," Thomas said. "I can hardly believe it." Mary took his hand as they walked. Her hand felt warm in his. "What will you do then?" she asked. "When the work is finished?" Thomas hadn't thought that far ahead. For weeks his only focus had been fixing the building, but now he realized something important. It wasn't just the building that was being fixed. It was him. "I'm not sure," he said honestly. "But for the first time in a long time, I'm looking forward to finding out." Fall turned the trees of Millfield Village into bright colors of gold and red. The old factory was almost ready to open. It had a new name now, Millfield Makers Hall. 12 people from the village had signed up to work there. They would make pottery, weave cloth, fix old furniture, and bake bread to sell. Richard Bennett asked Thomas to be the building manager. This job matched Thomas's skills and his new feeling of belonging. He said yes with a quiet sense of pride. After months of thinking his working days were over, he felt useful again. "We should have a proper celebration," Emma said one afternoon. They were putting in the last workbench. "Not just eating quick sandwiches while we work." Before Thomas could think too much about it, he heard himself asking, "Would you and your children like to come to my cottage for dinner? I'm not a fancy cook, but I can make a good shepherd's pie." That evening brought more warmth to his small cottage than it had felt in years. Emma's children, Oliver, who was 10, and Grace, who was 7, ran around laughing and playing with Henry the dog. Henry seemed young again, wagging his tail and following the children everywhere. Emma helped Thomas in the kitchen. They moved around each other as if they had been cooking together for years. "Your cottage is lovely," Emma said, looking at the stone walls and wooden beams. "It just needs a woman's touch." Thomas felt his face get warm. "Martha took most of the nice things when she left. She said they would be wasted on me." Emma put her hand on his arm for a moment. "Some things aren't wasted, Thomas. They're just waiting for the right time." After they ate, Oliver saw an old guitar in the corner. It was covered with dust. Thomas hadn't played it in years, but something made him pick it up. He tuned the strings and began to play songs from when he was young. He was surprised that his fingers remembered even if his mind had forgotten. Emma started to sing along. Her voice was clear and sweet. Even the children knew some of the songs and joined in. When Emma and her children left, promising to visit again soon, Thomas sat by the fire with Henry at his feet. His cottage didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of new possibilities. The next week, Thomas got a letter that threatened his new happiness. Martha wanted to sell the cottage. Her new life in the city cost a lot of money, and she needed her share of the house they had owned together. Thomas sat at his kitchen table with the letter crushed in his hand. Fear filled his heart. The cottage was the only home he had known for 20 years. Where would he go? How could he start over at his age? That evening, as it got dark, Thomas walked to the village green. Henry walked faithfully beside him. The lights of the King's Arms pub looked warm and friendly. Without really planning to go there, Thomas found himself pushing open the heavy wooden door. Inside, many villagers said hello to him in a friendly way. Richard Bennett waved for him to come over. Richard sat at a table with Mary, Robert and others who had worked on the revival project. Thomas told them about his problem with the cottage. They didn't feel sorry for him in a way that made him feel small. Instead, they gave him good ideas and real support. "My brother is a lawyer in the next town," Robert said. "He might be able to help you understand your rights." "You know," Mary said thoughtfully, "the flat above my bakery has been empty for ages. It needs some work, but you're good at fixing things." Thomas looked at Mary with surprise. "You would rent it to me?" Mary smiled. "I'd be lucky to have you as a tenant, and you'd always have fresh bread for breakfast." For the first time since getting Martha's letter, Thomas felt like he could breathe again. He wasn't alone in this. The next day, Robert's brother came to see Thomas. After looking at the papers from when Thomas and Martha bought the cottage, he had good news. "You've been paying the mortgage yourself since she left," the lawyer said, "and you've put a lot of work into the place over the years. We can make a case that you should keep the cottage and pay her a smaller amount." Thomas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. There was hope. That weekend, Emma and her children came over again. This time, Emma brought a few simple decorations. For the cottage, new curtains she had made herself, a colorful rug and some plants. "I hope you don't mind," she said shyly. "But this place could use some color." Thomas watched as she and the children moved around his cottage, making it brighter and more cheerful. Oliver helped him fix a squeaky door. Grace arranged the plants on the windowsills. Later, they all walked to the Maker's Hall to see how it looked now that it was almost ready to open. The big sign had just been put up over the door. Inside, each workshop space was clean and ready. Sunlight streamed through the new windows. "Hard to believe this is the same building," Emma said. Thomas nodded. Just a few months ago, this place had been dark and empty. Now it was ready for new life, just like him. That night, after everyone had gone home, Thomas sat down to write a letter to Martha. He wrote that he understood she needed money from the cottage. He told her about his new job as building manager. He said he would try to buy her share of the cottage over time. The letter was not angry or sad. It was calm and fair. As he sealed the envelope, Thomas realized something important. He wasn't the same man Martha had left. That man had been lost and afraid. This man had friends, purpose, and hope. The next morning, Thomas took the letter to the post office. On his way back, he stopped at Mary's bakery. "Have you thought about my offer?" she asked. "About the flat?" "I might be able to keep the cottage," Thomas told her, "but thank you for being there when I needed help." Mary smiled. "That's what friends do, Thomas. That's what a community does." Thomas walked back to the Maker's Hall feeling lucky. Whether he kept his cottage or had to move, he wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. Spring came to Millfield Village with fresh new life. Pink and white apple blossoms filled the trees. The community gardens next to the Maker's Hall showed rows of small green plants. The village that once seemed to be dying now felt busy and alive. Thomas now lived in the flat above Mary's bakery. He had moved there 3 months ago. It was smaller than his old cottage, but felt warm and cozy. His new friends had helped make it feel like home. Emma's children had made bright pictures for his walls. Robert had fixed the old electrical wires, and Mary brought fresh bread every morning. She often stayed for tea, and their talks grew deeper each day. The Maker's Hall was doing better than anyone had hoped. People from other towns came to watch the craftsmen work and buy the things they made. The farmers' market in the yard every week brought crowds who wanted fresh food. Thomas felt proud that everything ran so well under his care. Today was a special day, 1 year since the first community meeting that started it all. Millfield was having a big party on the village green. Tables were full of food that everyone had brought to share. People took turns playing music on a small stage. Thomas played his guitar too, which he had practiced a lot this year. As it got darker, Richard Bennett asked everyone to be quiet. He held up his glass. "To Millfield and to all of you who believed we could save our village." Everyone cheered loudly. Then someone shouted, "And to Thomas Walker, who brought our old factory back to life." Thomas felt shy but happy. He nodded. To thank them. He looked across the crowd and saw Mary smiling at him. Her warm smile made his heart beat faster. Later, as lanterns lit up the dark sky, Thomas and Mary walked slowly around the green. Henry the dog walked happily beside them. "I got a letter from Martha today," Thomas said. "She's getting married again." Mary held his hand gently. "How do you feel about that?" Thomas thought about it carefully. "I'm happy for her, really, and I'm grateful too." "Grateful?" Mary asked. "If she hadn't left me, I might never have found out what I could do, what was waiting for me here." He stopped talking for a moment, finding his courage. "Who was waiting for me?" Mary's eyes looked bright in the lantern light. "Some endings are just beginnings in a different shape," she said softly. Music played across the green. Thomas pulled Mary close for a dance under the stars. Over her shoulder, he could see Emma teaching her children how to dance. Robert was laughing with Edith. Dozens of other villagers, neighbors, friends, people who cared about each other, all joined together because they didn't give up. Thomas had sold his cottage last month. He thought he would feel sad about it, but instead, he just felt like he was turning to a new page in his life. Tomorrow he would help James Wilson start a new woodworking class for the village children. Next week, he and Mary planned to visit the sea. And in the fall, Emma would open her design shop in the small room next to his office. Thomas knew life would never be perfect. There would always be hard times. But he had learned that the difference between feeling hopeless and feeling hopeful often came down to one thing: having people who walk beside you on the journey. As the night grew cooler, Thomas put his jacket around Mary's shoulders. She smiled up at him with such warmth that Thomas felt his heart grow full. A year ago, he had been a broken man sitting alone in a dark cottage. Now he stood under the stars, surrounded by friends with a purpose and a future. "Penny for your thoughts," Mary said. "I was just thinking about how much can change in a year," Thomas replied. "Last spring I thought my life was over. Now it feels like it's just beginning." Mary nodded. "That's what spring is all about. New beginnings." They walked to the edge of the green where they could see the whole village. The lights of the Maker's Hall glowed in the distance. Closer by, the windows of the shops on High Street shone warmly. "Look at what we did," Mary said, her voice full of wonder. "We saved our village." "We did," Thomas agreed. "But the village saved me too." The next morning, Thomas woke early. The smell of fresh bread came up from the bakery below. He could hear Mary talking to her first customers of the day. Her laugh made him smile. After breakfast, Thomas walked to the Maker's Hall. People nodded and waved as he passed. At the hall, everything was already busy. James Wilson was setting up for the first children's woodworking class. Beatrice Miller arranged her handmade soaps in her small shop. Emma was measuring the space for her new design studio. "Morning, Thomas," they all called. Thomas looked around at what they had built together. The big windows let in streams of spring sunshine. The wooden floors gleamed. The sound of people working and talking filled the air. Thomas remembered standing in this same spot a year ago. Then the building had been empty and cold, full of dust and broken dreams. Now it was full of light and life and hope. Later that day, as Thomas sat in his office looking over the accounts, the hall was making a small profit now. There was a knock at his door. Mary stood there with 2 cups of tea. "Thought you might." "Need this," she said, putting 1 cup on his desk. "How did you know?" he asked with a smile. "I know you," she said simply. As they drank their tea and talked about their plans for the summer fair, Thomas felt a deep sense of peace. He had lost so much: his job, his marriage, even his cottage. But somehow, in losing those things, he had found something more valuable: a community, a purpose, and love. When Mary left to go back to the bakery, Thomas walked her to the door of the hall. Just before she left, she stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek. "See you for dinner?" she asked. "I'll bring the wine," he replied. As Thomas watched her walk away, he thought that sometimes life gives you second chances in the most unexpected ways. And sometimes what looks like an ending is really just the beginning of something better.